This is Gemara in Saita Daf Chaf Gimel. I'm holding on Chav Beis Amid Beis. We are 4 lines from the bottom. We pulled up in the middle of a Mishnah as the Mishnah Chav Beis Amid Beis goes all the way into today's Daf Chav Gimel Amid Aleph. So we learned the first part of the Mishnah the previous year, which was the debate as to whether these chosim, the merits of a woman, have the ability to hold back the destructive power of the Meisaita or not, says Rav Shimon. Not says Rav Shimon, because then people are going to question the veracity of the Meisaita. Whereas Rabbi says no, the schos has the ability to be taila and the woman slowly withers away, so everyone is aware of what is going on. And now we pick it up 4 lines from the bottom, Chav Beis Amid Beis, as the Mishnah continues with the karbanos, most particularly the mincha of the Saita. Says the Mishnah, Nitma'is minchasa ad shaloi kitsha bikli. What is the status of her mincha if it becomes tamei before it is kadosh bikli, before it is placed in the kli shareis, in the vessels of the Beis HaMikdash? What is the halacha? Says the Mishnah, harei kechol hamenachos. It's like any mincha v'tipadeh, and it shall be redeemed. Let's see the contrast, and then we'll explain. But if the karban already was placed into the kli shareis, and then it becomes tamei, harei kol hamenachos v'tisaref, and it will be burnt. From here we see that there's 2 statuses as to the kedusha of a karban. Before it goes into the kli shareis, it has kedusha, but it doesn't have the higher level of kedushas haguf. The kedushas haguf, the sanctity on the item itself, only comes when it goes into the kli shareis, and therefore, once it goes into the kli shareis, if it then becomes tamei, then it has to be burnt. As we see the last Rashi in the Summit, it says she'kadsha kedushas haguf, and therefore it no longer could be redeemed. At that moment, it has the Kedushas HaGuf, and therefore now that it is tamei, what do you have to do? You have no choice but to burn it. Continues the Mishnah with a general halacha. Now the general halacha. Continues the Mishnah. And the following cases of a saita, the karban mincha of them has to be burnt. So we turn over to Chav Gimel Amid Aleph. Says the Mishnah, Haimeres. Case number 1, they have to burn the mincha of the woman is when, if she says to me'ani lach, if she admits that she is tamei, she admits that she committed the crime. Therefore, what is the halacha? The halacha is the karban mincha is no longer, and therefore it is burnt. Shabahu la'idim she tameya, or they're aidin that she committed the crime. V'haimeres eini shaisa, or if she says, I will not drink, or the husband doesn't let her to drink, or if the husband had relations with her on the way to the Beis HaMikdash, a halacha that we've already seen, that the Meisaita doesn't have the power if there were relations between husband and wife, in between the Kinu Istira and between the drinking of the water. And finally concludes this portion of the Mishnah that anyone that is married to a kohen, the halacha is that if there's any problem with the karban has to be burnt, and it cannot be pada, it cannot be redeemed. Let's look at the top Rashi. Rashi says, what's going on in this case? Someone who's married to a kohen, va'afilu karav ha'koymet kilchasa. The kmitza, the 3 fingers, were done properly. V'loi nitmu, and it never became tamei. So why are you burning it? Nisrafen shirayin bebeis hadeshen kedavarish begamara. So Rashi points out that this part of the Mishnah breaks the rules. This part of the Mishnah tells us this has nothing to do with something becoming tamei, but rather a woman married to a kohen, her minchas asaita is not consumed, but rather is burnt. Continues the Mishnah, Chav Gimel Amid Aleph, 5 lines down. Bas Yisrael shenisis l'kayin, a regular Yisraelis that is married to a kohen, minchasa nisrefes, her mincha is burnt. Whereas v'kohenes shenisali Yisrael, if a bas kohen, her father was a kohen, but if she marries a Yisrael, then minchasa ne'acheles, her mincha is consumed. So we're seeing over here that there's something unique about ownership of a kohen that requires the mincha to be burnt, as the Gemara will explain in a few moments. Ma bein kohen le'kohenes, and now the Mishnah continues, a little bit digresses, we should say, and the Mishnah gives us differences in general between a kohen and a kohenes, between a woman who is married to a kohen and a woman whose father was I should say that, a woman who's married to a kohen, meaning the difference between a male kohen and the difference between a woman who is a kohenes that her father was a kohen. Says the Mishnah, minchas kohenes necheles. The mincha of a kohenes, the mincha of a woman whose father was a kohen, is allowed to be consumed. Or minchas kohen eino nechals. Whereas the mincha of a woman married to a kohen cannot be consumed, like we've seen, has to be burnt. Kohenes mischaleles. A kohenes, a woman whose father is a kohen, she could become mischaleles, which means disqualified, unable to marry a kohen. But the kohen einay mischalel, a kohen is not mischalel. Now what does that mean? Rashi over here, 4 lines into the narrow lines, teaches us that if a kohen goes and marries a grusha, zaina, or a chalala, even though the marriage is a be'isr, the kohen himself is not mischalel, he does not lose his status. Continues the Mishnah, kohenes mitama'ah lemesim. A kohenes, a woman whose father is a kohen, she's allowed to become tamei meis, whereas vein kohen tamei meisim. We know that the halacha that a kohen is not allowed to be tamei meis, but the Mishnah learns that's only done by a male kohen. Kohen oichel kachay kachim. Kohen can eat a kachay kachim, and Rashi fills in the details which karbanos are kachay kachim, a chatas, an asham, and a mincha, because all of them, the pasuk says, kol hazacharim b'koyanim yoichalenu, teaching us that the male kohanim eat from the kachay kachim, whereas ve'ein kohanes oichelas b'kachay kachim. Whereas a woman whose father is a kohen, she cannot eat from the kachay kachim. Continues the Mishnah, and I apologize that again we're having a little bit of link sync issues over here. Hopefully they will catch up with itself in a moment. Ma bein ish isha, says the Mishnah. What's the difference? What is the difference between a man and a woman with regard to halacha? We're going to see numerous differences. Once we're on the topic of explaining the difference between a male kohen and a woman whose father is a kohen, the Mishnah continues to teach us some general differences. Ha'ish paireu pairim, a man who is a mitzaira, the halacha is he has to let his hair grow and he has to rip his clothing. Whereas ve'nisha pairesu pairemes, a woman who's a mitzaira does not do that. Ha'ish madir has been a nazir, a man is able to say and make his son into a nazir, whereas an isha madar has been a nazir, a woman is not able to. Ha'ish megalech al naziras aviv, a man is allowed to shave utilizing the nazirs of his father, a topic that we dealt extensively in Nazir, whereas ve'nisha megalech al naziras aviv. Ha'ish mekadesh es bita, a man can marry off his daughter, whereas ve'nisha miskadesh es bita, a woman cannot marry off her daughter. Ha'ish meicher es bita, a man can sell his daughter to slavery, whereas ve'nisha meicher es bita. Ha'ish niskalarim, when a man undergoes a skila rachman al and is killed, Bezdin undresses him first. Ve'nisha niskalelas arum. Ha'ish nitla, a man is hung. Ve'nisha nitlis, whereas a woman is not hung. This means the dead body after the death is not hung. Whereas ve'ina isha nimkar has been gnevasa. So a whole list of differences is between a man and woman in general halacha. And now we go back and the Gemara begins. Let's go back into the dinim of the karban mincha, particularly of one who's married to a kohen, in which the Mishnah taught us a unique halacha that the mincha has to be burnt. We said we're going to see in the Gemara what is the reason. Tanu Rabbanan. Here we go. Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, halfway down the Amid as we begin the Gemara. Kol hanisuais likahuna. anyone that is married into the kahuna have a unique halacha. Minchais and this rafais. Their carbon minchais have to be burnt. They will never consume the carbon mincha. Ketzad. What's the case? Kanis Levi of Yisraelis. If any type of woman, whether she's her father's a kohen, a Levi Yisrael, shenisseis lekayin, she marries a kohen. What's the halacha? Ein minchasa nechel, as her carbon mincha is never consumed. Why not? Finally, we learn why not. Because the halacha is whatever a woman owns, her husband owns, because the husband, has a portion in her everything, and therefore, anytime a kohen has a portion in a carbon mincha, the halacha is veina oilel oila kalil, and the carbon of the kohen is not brought up to be completely consumed. Why? Meaning, excuse me, I said that wrong. One more time. It can't be consumed. Why not? Because the husband, the kohen, has a portion of it. And it can't be brought up and be completely destroyed. Why not? Because she has a portion of it. Ella, so what do we do? They do the kamitz, they take the 3 fingers worth, they bring that up on the mizbeach. Vashirayim, and the remainder, which usually is the portion of the carbon, which is consumed, karivin ba'atzmai, has to be burnt by itself. Why? He says has to be burnt by itself. So it says the Gemara, the reason why anytime a woman is married to kohen, the mincha cannot be consumed, has to do with the bailos, the ownership that her husband, the kohen, has, and therefore the halacha of the carbon of a kohen is that it has to be completely burnt. The reason that we have to do it in 2 stages is because part of it is owned by the woman herself. Says the Gemara, Ikri Khan, why don't we say over here the rule, apply the following rule, 12 lines to the end of Chav Gimel Lamed Aleph, Kol Shumi Menu Lishim, Harehu Bebal Taktiru. Why don't we apply the rule that anything which is part of the Mizbeach is not allowed to be burnt, the remainder on the Mizbeach, meaning there's a special rule in Kachim that once part of an item is brought up onto the Mizbeach, you can't re-bring the other part of the item onto the Mizbeach. And therefore, if part of this carbon is burnt, if the Kemitza is brought up, you shouldn't be able to do a second stage and burn the remainder of it. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda Breder Rav Shimon ben Bazi, Temasik Lahu L'Sham Eitzim. He explains that the reason that the kohen has to burn is as firewood. Kirav Elazar. Titani, we learned in a Brayse 8 lines to the bottom of Elazar, Aimer, Le'reach Nichayach Yata Maila. This rule, this unique rule that anything that goes up onto the Mizbeach one time cannot be brought a second time, is a rule that it cannot be brought up a second time as a Reach Nichayach, as a carbon. It could be used as firewood, and that's how by us in the case of the Mincha Saita that's married to a kohen, the carbon that will be brought as the kemitza first, and then afterwards the rest will be burnt. Says the Gemara, very good, Rav Elazar himself holds of this svara, but continues the Gemara 4 lines from the bottom. El Rabbanan de Leslie Aisvara, my Amrle. The Rabbanan don't make such a differentiation. So what are you going to say? Answers the Gemara 3 lines to the bottom. Rav Elazar Rav Shimon. You know what the Rabbanan are going to explain? They're going to explain like Rav Elazar Rav Shimon. Titania, we learned in a Braisa. Rav Elazar Rav Shimon Aimer teaches Rav Elazar bir Rav Shimon. Ha-koimeitz karav be'atzmai. They bring the kemitza, and then vashirayim mispazrin al beis hadeshen. It's not properly burnt, but rather the shirayim of this carbon mincha is done what? Is scattered on the ashes, on the heap of ashes on the mizbeach, and therefore that is not a violation of bringing something on the mizbeach 2 times. And as we turn over to Chag Gimel Amud Beis, the Gemara explains that afilu Rabbanan, even the Rabbanan loy pligi alei Rav Elazar Rav Shimon, even the Rabbanan don't argue on Rav Elazar Rav Shimon ella beminchas chaytei shel koyanim, they're only referring to the special carbon mincha of the kohanim, the basak ravi that could be brought. Aval baha filu rabbanan maida. But in this case, even the rabbanan are going to admit that this is what you would do: is you would scatter the remainder on the heap of ashes on the mizbeach. And now we continue, and now we're going to go through the rest of the dinim in the Mishnah, the differences between the Israelis and the Kohanim, and cite all the sources. 4 lines from the top, Chav Kilmon Beis, says the Gemara, Basi Yisrael and Asua V'chula Mai Taima. What is the reason that the carbon mincha is burnt, whereas on the flip side, if she's married to Israel, it's not Amar Krav, Chol Minchas Koyin Kalil, all the minchas of the Koyin have to be burnt, yeah? Lo Yiseichal Koyin V'loi Koyanes, neither the Koyin nor, Lo Yiseichal, end of the pasuk. That all the carbon minchas of a Koyin have to be burnt, explains the Gemara, Koyin V'loi Koyanes. That's a special halacha by a kohen; they can't be eaten, but a kohenes it can't be eaten; it has to be burnt. But by a kohenes, whereas her father was a kohen, then it would be allowed to be. Be allowed to be consumed. I apologize for the technological difficulties. Kohenes mischaleles kohen in mischalel. A kohenes can be mischalel, not a kohen. Minalan. Amar Kra says the Torah v'lachal zara b'hamov. Zar'oi mischalel v'hu eino mischalel. The zera, this offsprings are mischalel, but he himself, the kohen, is not mischalel. Kohen is mitamah v'chulu. A woman whose father was a kohen, she's allowed to become tamei meis. My time Amar Kra Emar el Kohanim b'nei Aroin. And we darsha for this pasuk b'nei Aroin v'loi b'nei Aroin. This is the source that a kohen cannot become tamei. Clearly referring to the b'nei and not b'nei Aroin. Koyin oicha b'kachei kachim koyanim are allowed to eat kachei kachim, but not a woman whose father was a koyin d'chsev kol zachar b'nei Aaron yechalenu. Says the Gemara, ma bein ish the isha. We go into the second half, the latter half of the Mishnah that discusses general differences between men and women. Tan Rabba Anan, says the Gemara, ish ein li ela ish isha minayin. Says the Gemara, the pasuk talking about Sarah says ish. How do we know? That's only talking about an Isha Minayim. For where do I know that the same halacha it applies to a woman? There are 2 types of people, men and women mentioned them. Ish, for a different reason. Ish for the next halacha, that the halacha of cutting the hair, the halacha of ripping the clothing is halacha. That is a halacha specific to men and not to a woman. We continue. Ish Madir has been Ibn Nazir. Veina Isha Madaris has been Ibn Nazir. A man could make his son a Nazir, not a woman. Amar Rav Yechla Lachi Ben Nazir Tzalach L'Moshe Sinai. Haish Megalech on Nazirus Aviv. A man could be Megalech on his father's Nazirs, and not a woman. Veina Isha Megalech on Nazirus Aviv. Again, Amar Rav Yechla Lachi Ben Nazir Tzalach L'Moshe Sinai. Haish Mekadesh Bita. Veina Isha Mekadesh Bita. A man could marry off his daughter, but a woman cannot. Tersev says the Torah is beating Esati l'Shazeh. The Pasuk says that my daughter, referring to a man, is allowed to give away his daughter in marriage, but not a woman. A man can tell his daughter, not a woman. As the Pasuk says, a man marries off his daughter. A man is stoned undressed. My time of Ragmu Aisai, says the Torah. You know we learned this out from. Says the pasuk v'ragmu, and they shall stone him. My Aisai, ilay Aisai v'laisah. If it means that she doesn't get skila, it can't be. V'aksev Aisai isha Aisai isha hahi, taken out to be stoned. El Aisai v'leich susai v'laisah v'leich susah. Must be a different halacha that he is stoned undressed, but she is not. Hayish nizla ve'ina isha nitzles. A man is hung, but a woman is not hung. Says the Gemara, my taima. Only him and not her. And finally, we conclude this parak that a ish nimkar b'gnevasa and isha nimkar b'gnevasa. My time, what is the reason that a man is not sold in his geneva? Says the Gemara. Nope, not the balloons. Okay, let's get some confetti. Says the Gemara, my time, Amar Kra. Okay, no confetti. Oh, there's the confetti. Confetti's only happening a little bit today. Says the pasuk, "V'nimkar b'gnevasai, b'gnevasai, v'loi b'gnevasai," sold into the slavery, b'gnevasai, and not gnevasai. So says the Gemara, therefore, that's what we learn out, that only a ish is nimkar, not an isha. Hadra and halach, we have to do, as always, an incredible chazara of this third parak of Saita. And Amir Hashem, tomorrow we will pick up from the fourth parak, B'siyata Dishmaya.